Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share that if you're looking for fun and convenient continuing education contact hours, I've got you covered. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 are now approved for CE contact hours. Yes, no more having to sit at your computer and watch a recorded webinar. You can listen to the Therapy Show episodes while you commute, in between sessions, on your lunch hour, while you exercise. And if you want to get the contact hour after you listen to the episode, just head over to my site, www.lisamustard.com, click on Pod Courses, and then click Purchase. It's pretty simple and easy, yet if you have any issues with your purchase, just send us an email. Okay, how do I introduce this first guest? I've been thinking about this intro for many days, and there are so many incredible things to let you know about him. I first met him when I was a grad student in the counselor education program at the University of South Carolina. And over the years, we have run into each other at workshops and seminars, and he always has a warm smile on his face and a kind word to offer. So when I saw him last month at a VA event, I jumped at the opportunity to invite him onto the show. So what should you know about Vince Ward? And I'm reading this directly from his website because he explains it all so well. My experience as both client and therapist has taught me that successful therapy depends on the quality of the relationship. Therapists are not interchangeable. If the fit is not good, then the therapy will be at best slow and at worst ineffective. If the fit is good, then the skill of the therapist and the courage of the client, you, become the critical factors. After many years of experience and mentoring by a few of the best master therapists in the world, my approach is eclectic. I draw on a number of techniques from a variety of approaches in my work. I'm trained in systemic, psychodynamic, Jungian, and Gestalt therapies, among others. I believe in a few basic truths about human growth, wounding, and healing that may help you know me. The resources for healing do not lie in anything I do. They are already in you, waiting to be tapped. A quote-unquote good therapist is one who knows how to hold a mirror so you can see more deeply into yourself, discover the true meaning of your trouble, and activate those interior resources for healing. In addition to expertise, there are two things you need from me, without which your success is less clear, less effective, and less your own. The first is respect, and the second is sovereignty. In most cases, emotional and relationship healing and health do not come without a price. Pain and courage are the price life exacts for peace. Here's the truth. If you become my client, I can't guarantee successful outcomes. I can guarantee respect, sovereignty, and emotional intensity. And for today's episode, I asked Vince to discuss whatever he wanted to in regards to the field of talk therapy. You see, Vince has been a therapist for a long time, before licensing was even a thing, and I'm always interested to hear his perspective and take on things within our field and profession. We cover quite a few topics and ideas, such as understanding the size of the brain, the absence of the feminine in men, his view on telehealth, his road to becoming a therapist, what he hopes to be his legacy, and why, as therapists, we need to continue to work on ourselves, and why we shouldn't ever give up on self-examination. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. When I said, hey, Vince, you want to be on my podcast, did anything come to mind that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I have been into something that is sort of at the top of my list of organizers.
Okay.
It has to do with talk therapy and the importance of talk therapy as distinct from this kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, let's get into it. I want to hear it.
All right. It has to do with the brain and hemispheric balance. As I'm sure you already know, the two sides of the brain have different functions. Mm-hmm. And just to kind of review that, the left side of the brain is the side that's logical, rational. It contains lots of information. It's the seat of the ego. And so it has many things in it that our culture seems to like a lot. And I think that the DSM is a product of the left side of the brain, for example. But then the right side of the brain is less well understood and less widely understood. but I read a book a few years ago called My Stroke of Insight, which was about do you know the book?
No, I think you mentioned that to me when I saw you, and I need to go get that book for sure.
Yeah, probably so, because it's a book written by a famous brain scientist named Jill Bolte Taylor, who is a Harvard-educated neuropsychologist. And she woke up one morning having a stroke. And by the time she actually figured out what was going on, most of the left side of her brain had been covered with raw blood, which I learned from this book is toxic to brain cells. It puts them to sleep, it kills them, it distorts the way they perform, and so on. So by noon, she had no left side functions at all. So she couldn't remember who she was. She couldn't remember her own history. She couldn't remember the people she loved. She couldn't speak or understand speech, so she could make noise. So she lived out of the right side of her brain for 2 or 3 days. And the most mind-blowing part of the book is about what that was like for her, living out of the right side of her brain. She didn't know any of that stuff I just mentioned, couldn't remember her name, didn't recognize her own mother, had no history, and no real thought process, no cognitive process as we know it from the left side. But what she did feel was total and unbounded empathy. She could sense the feelings of all the people around her. So if the doctor who came in to see her that morning had just had a fight with his wife, she could feel his anger, and she'd hide under the covers because that was so disturbing to her.
Wow.
And a sort of a side effect of the same thing was that she felt like she was part of everything and everyone around her. So there was this profound sense of, to kind of trivialize a Zen saying, she was one with everything. And so if we say that the left side of the brain is the seat of the ego, it dawned on me while I was reading the book that the right side of the brain could be the seat of heart and soul, the seat of connectedness, the seat of the thing that makes us all one. And then if you recognize that under normal circumstances, the two sides of the brain are underlay by something called the corpus callosum, which is the communication channel between the hemispheres, among other things. So it's clear, or it was clear to me, that God or nature, or however you want to think about that, intended the two sides of the brain to communicate. And so it intended our consciousness to be the product of that dialogue. Well, in the West, we dismiss, don't think about, don't understand, don't worry about the right side of the brain, where we overvalue the left. And I think that began a long, long time ago, maybe as far back as, when God became male and singular and flew up to heaven. And then a millennium later, we had the Renaissance, where the choice was made between science and medicine on the one hand, and magic and mystery on the other. And the magic and the mystery is in the right side of the brain. So we dismissed the right side of the brain at the Renaissance, and we've been loving the left side of the brain ever since. The other thing about the left and right sides of the brain is that the left is considered masculine because of the way it functions, and the right is considered feminine because of the way it functions. So we've also wound up dismissing the feminine. And I think that was a disaster. Carl Jung talks about the interior opposite gender of both men and women. And so you have a masculine side on the inside, and I have a feminine side that's on the inside. And the Jungians say that the task is to resurrect the feminine in both individual men and in the culture. And so the absence of the feminine and the right functions of the brain, or the functions of the right side of the brain, are crucial to survival of Western culture. How hard it is to promote this kind of idea, because the ultimate goal is to suggest that people need to try to spend more time in the right side of their brains.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some techniques for doing that. Mainly, it's about trying to promote activities that require use of the right side of the brain as well as the left. Because it's not that the ego is bad and the right side is good. It's because we have to use the left side of our brains to interpret things. So we couldn't even talk about this if we didn't have the left side of the brain working well.
Okay.
But if we do things like tell stories or analyze dreams or use metaphors or play instruments or dance, do something in the arts,
Mm-hmm.
those require right brain input. And so the corpus callosum gets to work and creates this dialogue between the two sides of the brain.
Hmm.
If we do that more, I mean, I don't know because it's kind of an experiment, but we would hope then that there is more access to the stuff on the right side of the brain, which is, in a way, in order for our own culture to become less polarized and less conflictful and so on, the right side of the brain has got to be involved because that's the side that connects us.
Okay. So let me ask a question. Can I make the jump to this idea? The more we pursue art, the more we pursue creativity,
Mm-hmm.
the more we might be able to connect and join with others and
Yes.
understand each other. Okay. Okay.
Yes, and might not the Democrats and Republicans might not have to fight as much.
Right. Right. That's a interesting point. I mean, that's an interesting concept, and I can only kind of speak from my own personal experiences, of course. And I think tell me what you think about this. Do you feel as though being a therapist is a creative endeavor?
Oh yes,
Okay. Okay,
yes.
cool.
I think we have to, as therapists, we have to join our clients.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the left side of the brain is a disconnector. I've also read that, based on research, that like if people have the corpus callosum cut so they can't communicate,
Mm-hmm.
the two sides of the brain can't communicate, the people who are victims of that can't make decisions. Like if you ask your client, okay, do you want to come at 12 tomorrow or at 4 on Friday? They can reason it through very well. Let's see, 12 o'clock would be good because then I don't have to take time away from work.
Mm-hmm.
4 o'clock would be good because then I don't have to go back to work if I'm upset. And then they have to go back around the same cycle. 12 o'clock would be good because I wouldn't have to take time off from work. 4 o'clock would be good but they can't decide.
Yeah.
Making a decision requires the function of valuing, which requires emotional input, which is gone if you don't have the right side of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So they get stuck in decision making. And so we actually require the right side of the brain to continue to function. Our refusal to embrace the right side of the brain, which means embracing intuition, creativity, etc. All we're doing is making sure that we don't understand how emotions are affecting us and our decisions, because they're still working,
Mm-hmm.
still there. We just know it, and we refuse to examine it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's like people who say, don't let emotions get in the way of making decisions. They're only deciding not to know how their emotions are affecting them.
Right.
And pretending that they don't have any feelings. And I think this has been going on for so long, for so many generations, that this fact is responsible for how easy it is to disconnect
Mm-hmm.
the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now if you put that together with what I call on-screen time, that is spending all your time on computers, adults and children spending so much time on computers and tablets and smartphones and TVs and so on. There's plenty of research that's fairly recent that shows that that's bad for our cognitive development and bad for our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you and I right now, we're looking at each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very seductive. It feels like we're in person with each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's a virtual connection. And I don't think our psyches are wired for virtual connections. I think they're wired for real connections.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, coming to my office to interview me would be a good idea,
Mhm.
because that would be a real connection. You're really in the room. We're really in each other's presence.
I agree. I think that would be that's my hope is, well, I got to figure out the technology. This actually is a lot easier for me to figure out than figuring out how to come to your office but I'm going to do it cuz I agree with you. What do you think about telehealth and online counseling?
I
I'm
think the
really
same
curious.
thing.
Okay.
I think the same thing, that it has many shortcomings that are not recognizable because the medium is so seductive.
Mhm.
Because it feels like we're right here with each other.
Mhm.
Not.
No.
So we are both seduced into feeling like we're in connection with one another, but there's this missing piece. So if the left brain disconnects us from ourselves, then the on-screen time that we spend disconnects us from each other. And I think it's a big problem in psychotherapy, because it makes things like best practices and evidence-based therapy and the DSM and so on so seductive, but it tends to disconnect us.
Mhm.
You
Oh
look
yeah.
at DSM and look at the criteria for PTSD, and suddenly you're treating the diagnosis instead of the person in front of you. So I think that's a disconnector. I did a 8-hour supervision workshop for SCAMFT at the beginning of last month, and the title of it was Restoring Heart and Soul to Psychotherapy Through Supervision. I had to kind of stretch it a little bit to cover supervision,
Right.
but it was the opportunity. I'd been asked to do it. And I said, well, if I don't do this now, when? So I made that the focus of it. And that's what I call it, restoring heart and soul to psychotherapy.
Mhm. What were some of your key points? And I know that's a long day of continuing education, 8 hours. But what would you say were the big aha moments for the therapist in the room?
What I've said to you in the last half hour,
Okay,
that was the main thing. And then we did some experiential exercises.
like what?
Well, like somebody volunteering to be the client and somebody volunteering to be the supervisor, and then having somebody volunteer to be heart and soul and ego. And we hear from all of them as we do a little practice. Like, here's the problem, let's do some therapy around it, and then have everybody report what it was like for them to be in the role they were in. It. What's it like for you to be in the role of heart,
Hmm.
in the role of soul? And the way I think of it is that soul is the connection to self and heart is the connection to others. So we can locate both of those things in a certain way that enables people to talk from that position. And when they do, they're learning about the issue and they're practicing supervision. They're practicing supervision with heart and soul,
Yeah.
just going over cases and techniques. And I think one of the outcomes of all this thinking is that the support of Russell Haber's idea that the primary thing in therapy is the person of the therapist,
Yeah.
or the self of the therapist.
Yeah. Russ was my supervisor, my clinical supervisor.
So he was
Yeah.
mine. Huh.
Was he? Get out.
Yeah, he mentored me into psychotherapy in the early 80s.
So can we back it up and tell me how you even became a therapist? I don't know the story.
Sure. I became a therapist by becoming a client.
Oh.
I moved down here to South Carolina in a way to save my first marriage. We moved here from Erie, Pennsylvania, because one day when we wound up driving nose down into a snowbank, my wife turned to me and said, I'm moving south. Want to come?
There you go.
And so I said, okay. So I started calling people up that I knew at universities in the South, because at that time I was a university professor.
Okay.
So I went to USC first,
What did you teach?
child and family studies,
Ah, okay.
human sexuality. And I tried to get, in fact, I tried to get my first wife to join me in marriage therapy with Russell and Karen.
Oh.
She went one time and then wouldn't go back. So being a little bit narcissistic, I said to myself, well, she won't go, but I'll go. I'll fix myself and that'll fix the marriage. Well, that didn't work. So we ultimately divorced.
Mm-hmm.
6 months after we separated, I lost my job at the university. It was a grant-funded position, half with DSS, half an old Title 20 grant from DSS, and half funded by the university. So I was teaching at the university and developing training programs for DSS. And the legislature pulled the grant 2 years early, 3 years early. So I went home on Friday afternoon with the job, but came back on Monday morning and had 2 weeks' notice. So at that point, I'd already been to a few of Russell's workshops. I'd been exposed to Whitaker.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before licensing.
Oh, okay.
I was doing a little bit of sort of parent consulting on the side because I know kids, new kids and no kids. And so I was consulting, and I decided that I would just call myself a therapist. So I just raised my hand and said, I'm a therapist now. It took me 4 years to get to a full-time private practice. But so I used to say, I'm in full-time private practice, quarter time.
That's awesome.
And then I got exposed to Whitaker, Friedman, and Andolfi, and Mnuchin through and his bringing those people to Columbia. And after a while, Russell invited me to join his private practice, and I did. That was it. So the two biggest disasters of my life, one losing my job and the other losing my family, turned out to be the best things that ever happened to me, because I wound up, Lisa, marrying Rayanne Merck's mother. She's my stepdaughter.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
How could I forget that?
I don't know. Well, I can't forget it because now she's a landlady too.
Oh my gosh. How could I forget that you are her stepfather? Vince, I need to work on my right brain to do some memory stuff. Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, it's all kind of coming together now. So that's really cool. And I just want to throw in there that I think it's really, it's tragic those things happen, but at the same time, you've used them as growing opportunities.
Yes.
And that's really neat. And I think that's really inspiring. And that's really what sent me to, well, that's how I became a therapist. Was the love of my life ended up breaking up with me because he told me I was a very unhappy person to be around. And I was like, what do you mean? I don't understand that. And I went to counseling, and that's when I saw Jennifer Savitz. She was my first therapist. And that experience was just so eye-opening that I was like, I want to do this too. And but the best part about it is we ended up getting back together, and we're married and have 2 kids. And I always think back to, because of the work I did on myself. And don't get me wrong, he's not perfect. He will admit he's done plenty of his own work over the years, but it just keeps me aware, and it keeps me like, what's going on here? I'm so self-aware now in my marriage and as a mom. Sometimes I'm not perfect, but it's easier, it's easier for me to go, okay, I own that. I'm going to work on that. I'm going to do different. This episode of The Therapy Show is sponsored by my favorite fitness apparel, Zaya Active. I recently discovered Zaya Active when I went looking for high quality and premium workout clothes. Just like those luxury store and catalog brands, yet I wanted a budget-friendlier price tag. I love this brand because, number one, I live a very active lifestyle. I hit the gym about 5 days a week, plus I love to go for runs and long walks, which I consider to be my very important self-care and podcast listening time. Plus, the endorphins I get from my workouts keep me in my happy mental space. The clothes stay put, I'm not constantly pulling on my leggings or tugging on my sports bras, and they accentuate me in all the right places. And number two, when I work from home, I love to be comfortable in leggings, also known as yoga pants, and a tank top. Plus, I can transition to running out the door to pick up our girls or run errands while still looking put together in my athleisure styles. My favorite workout leggings are the light and tights, and my favorite everyday wear are the everywhere pants. I literally wear them everywhere, every day. I can even wear them to business meetings or client consultations. I can dress them up or down easily. Want to learn more? Head over to lisamustard.com and click on the Activewear page. You can learn all about Zaya Active, the mission, the clothes, and see if they are a fit for you and your active life. From weight training to running to Zumba to yoga to CrossFit to bar to walking to tennis, Zaya Active has you covered. And don't forget about the active men in your life. They have an amazing men's line, plus clothes for active kids too. That's Zaya like papaya active. So see my site for all the details.
Rayanne's mother, my wife, she's kind of followed me around as I've done therapy and intensive work in groups over the years. It turns out that she's sort of inherently wise. She doesn't think so. She doesn't get it when I say stuff like that, but she is. And I have to say, I guess I'm like you. We've been married 36 years now.
Wow.
And all I can say is it gets sweeter every year.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So these two disasters that happened to me turned out to be blessings in disguise.
Yeah.
Because without losing my job, I never would have become a therapist. And without losing my marriage, I never would have found Ray Lee.
Yeah. How did you meet her?
Well, that's an interesting story, too. Neither of us are party goers. We don't bar hop or do any of that stuff. And that was true back then, too. This was 1983. But we both were acquainted with Melissa Bush, and she was throwing a party because she had just earned her PhD. So it was her PhD party. We both wound up being invited totally separately. And we met there at the party. And that was just the beginning, but it wasn't a couple of months before you named your husband the love of your life. Well, that's what we found out we had. And that was, without her, I don't think that my career as a therapist would have been as rewarding and as central as it has become. She is somehow sort of holds everything together from the inside. And she's also my bookkeeper, so that helps.
Right. She's directing you. Okay, Vince, you need to see X more sessions this week if we want to take our trip. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's not like that. She, like I said, she used to join me sometimes in the intensive therapy groups that I did. Did you see Al Peso?
Did I do that group? I feel like I did. Yeah, I want to say I did that group many years ago.
Yeah. Well, I started doing something similar on my own after I told Peso I was going to do that. He said, "Well, you can't do that." And I said, "Well, why not?" "Well, I've never seen you work." And although that sounded reasonable, it pissed me off.
Yeah, I bet.
He says, "You can do your own thing and call it something else," which is what I wound up doing.
Of course, yeah.
He used to join me in those groups.
Oh, cool.
For 4 or 5 years, I was doing like 8 or 10 weekend therapy groups a year. And she would come to them with me. Kind of burned out on that part. And I'm getting too old. I don't have the energy anymore to do that many groups. So I haven't done any in a couple of years now.
Do you have a format for that group that you could teach others how to do it?
Yeah, it was. In fact, I developed a training program and I integrated it with the therapy groups.
Cool.
And the deal was that I offered CEs because I made my corporation a, what do they call it, permanent provider for licensing board. So I offered CEUs. And if you go to 8 or 10 weekends a year, you get a lot of CEUs.
Yeah, you do.
But I told people that you have to, in order to actually earn the CEUs, you have to participate as a client in these groups. So there was a distinction made between the clients and the therapists. And I did have a training group that kind of petered out on its own somehow. And so I don't offer that either as training or as therapy anymore, although I still claim it on my website.
Would you want to bring it back?
I'll tell you, if it didn't cost me so much energy, and if my wife were still going, yes, I'd want to bring it back because it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And you can as a client, you could clear up the major thing in your life right now in one weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. It really worked that well.
Yeah.
So yes, I'd want to bring it back, but I don't want to be away from I don't like being away from my wife for the weekends anymore.
Yeah. I understand that.
Yeah.
Well, what if somebody today was listening and they said, I'd be interested in picking it up from you and learning how to facilitate that? Would you be open to like training trainers?
Yeah, I'd figure out a way to do it.
Okay. Because you never know. That might be you've got so much. You've got a legacy here with therapy and with helping people. And I know I kind of said this when I saw you last week, and I hope you didn't take it an offensive way, but you're like the old guard. Like you've been around, you've been doing
Yeah.
this work a long time. You were a therapist before you were licensed.
Right.
And I would personally, I would hate to see any of your work that you've developed and created go away because it's
Well,
so
thank you for saying
powerful. Well, it's very
this.
powerful.
It's another way that it's a blessing is that probably, the next phase of my own growth was that I ran into a group called Journey into Wholeness. Did you ever hear of it?
Mm-mm.
It was a group. The subtitle of the organization was Integrating Jungian Theory with Spirituality. When I went to one of those places, that blew me away
Mm-hmm.
because of the power of Jungian thought. Kept going 2 or 3 times a year this is where I got all my CEUs every year.
Mm-hmm.
I ran into a number of brilliant people. One of them was Robert Johnson. Like what I say is I was blessed with an elder mentor named Carl Whitaker in my 40s,
Mm-hmm.
another elder mentor after he died in Robert A. Johnson for the next 10 years, the
Mm-hmm.
decade of the 60s. And so I just find Jungian thought and integrating, you asked me how I would put this business about left brain, right brain, Jung has a way
Mm-hmm.
to do that explicitly, but if it hadn't been for my exposure to Jungian thought, I never would have recognized the number of ways the things that you can do that require use of the right side of the brain.
Yeah.
So, and both of those men were the wisest men I ever met, Carl Whitaker and Robert A. Johnson. I do a little spiritual ritual of my own, not every morning, but most mornings, in which I use the medicine wheel from the Native American
Mm-hmm.
culture with the 4 directions. And as part of that, I include an homage and acknowledgement of my debt to Carl and my debt to Robert so that I don't forget
Yeah.
it's sort of like citing authority while you're writing something.
Yeah.
I want to pay attention to these guys. They're both dead now, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't ignore my debt to them.
Yeah. Well, they've obviously made a really big impact on you. And
Absolutely.
yeah. What's the impact that you hope you have made?
Well, another conclusion that I've come to over the years, I was on my way to saying something else.
Oh.
One of the blessings of this whole business has been that for the last 20 or so years, I've known without doubt that I'm doing exactly what I was sent here to do. This is my life. And I say I have 2 great loves, my work and my wife.
Mm-hmm.
They complement each other. And I've come to believe, to answer your question, that very few of us have the opportunity to really change the world. I mean, it's arrogant to think so. Donald Trump thinks he can change the world to suit his image, but
Right.
that's his mental illness talking. So I think that as the continued development of the self of the therapist is an obligation to the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have an obligation to keep working on ourselves. Otherwise, we work out our own shit on our clients.
That's true. So true.
And so I think that's the way we change the world. Is I change because I continue to get therapy and supervision. I take that into my therapy office, and I'm different with my clients. And the impact on them is to change if all works well. And then they go back to their lives and the people they know, and they take their changes with them. If all go, that's how to change the world, one person at a time. Mm-hmm. I think that therapy is almost, this is probably pretty arrogant too, but I think therapy is almost like a potential savior of the world. And that's the only way it's going to happen, one person at a time. Mm-hmm. You embrace the changes that come to you during your own work, and then you take that into the rest of your life and the other people you meet. So that's the legacy. I also have sent off a project, title of which is The Elder's Apprentice, to Sounds True. Do you know that?
Mm-mm. No.
Publish CDs and DVDs with sometimes an occasional book to go with them, but that's their business. And so I've put together a project that's a book, a document, small book, and a collection of dreams and stories, myths that I intend to put on CD and to accompany the book, or rather the book accompanies the CDs. Mm-hmm. And so if that gets picked up by somebody and published, that'll be part of my legacy too.
Oh, it will. That sounds exciting.
I don't know what's happened, but for a long time I stalled on that at several places. Mm-hmm. Along the way. I just stalled and dropped it and didn't do anything with it. Mm-hmm. Now I just sent it off, so I finished that. Something happened in there that changed my confidence level, point where I was actually willing to finish the things I had started. So it was kind of an interesting experience. I still don't know what happened there. I don't know what the stalls were, and I don't know what the...
Yeah. So what's a couple ideas or thoughts you have for those coming up behind you as therapists? What do you say to them? Us, me.
Never get out of therapy for at least supervision.
Okay.
Because there's my experience. I'm 77 years old. Mm-hmm. My experience being 77 is that stuff is still bubbling up. Stuff is still coming. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're paying attention, that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. If the point of life is to make the unconscious conscious, you'll never run out of material.
True. Mm-hmm.
The unconscious is so vast and so deep that there's always something wanting to come up next. And if you're in therapy or supervision, you're much more likely to spot that.
Yeah.
As it comes.
Okay.
That would be my advice. Plan to stay in therapy. Plan to remain a client.
What do you think about different therapists finding, do you stay with one or do you jump around? What do you think about that?
Well, my therapy has been to be with Whitaker for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Well, Russell to begin with. Mm-hmm. And then Whitaker, and then Robert Johnson. Mm-hmm. And now I have one of the other Jungians that I met at that organization I mentioned. Mm-hmm. He's my dream analyst, so I call him every couple of weeks to tell him about my dreams. Mm-hmm. And that's therapeutic. I'm still in therapy. Mm-hmm. His name's Barry Williams, and he is a fascinating guy. This is a guy who, with his wife, Renata, mm-hmm. an initiated shaman in the Huichol tribe of Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So, and he's done the whole thing, the drugs and the sacrifice of an animal and the whole business.
Yeah.
And I can see how he blends them when he's talking to me. Mm-hmm. He has a deliberate plan about how to blend them, but I can hear one thing that sounds more shamanic and another thing that sounds more Jungian as I'm working with him. Mm-hmm. Just a fascinating guy. And he's only 2 years younger than I am. Mm. So
cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
So stay in therapy or supervision.
Yeah.
Anything else?
A sort of collateral rule, I would say, never give up on self-examination, which of course therapy helps with. Because if you don't give up on supervision, if you don't give up on self-examination,
Mm-hmm.
which therapy promotes, then you'll continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And if you continue to embrace your growth, then you will continue to change and get better as a therapist. So never give up on self-examination, never give up on therapy or supervision, and certainly never give up on self-examination.
Wisdom
And
speaking.
don't be a slave to the left brain.
Yes. Don't be a slave to the left brain. I like that. This has been such an awesome hour for me to spend with you, somebody that I have respected and known since I was a grad student. And I just
Remember,
appreciate you. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
thank you very much for saying those things.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine. Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content. And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.